Hello, everyone. Today marks our first discussion regarding Charlie Munger. We deconstruct the modern epistemological crisis of extreme specialization and explore Charlie Munger's multidisciplinary latticework as the ultimate algorithmic solution. Modern intellectual training suffers from a severe systemic bottleneck. We operate in a world that heavily rewards hyper-specialization, creating an unavoidable cognitive lock-in. When a professional spends a decade mastering a single analytical tool, their intellect is subsequently forced to distort complex reality to fit that limited framework. This is what Munger famously identifies as the man with a hammer syndrome to a man with only a hammer. Every problem looks like a nail. The danger here is not simply ignorance, it is the active distortion of truth. Multidimensional worldly systems are fluid, interconnected, and highly unpredictable. Yet, our academic and professional institutions relentlessly force these dynamic systems through single variable frameworks. Consider a financial analyst attempting to model a market crash using only economic theory, completely ignoring human psychology or evolutionary biology. The tool itself becomes the blindfold. Extreme specialization creates an artificial boundary around human perception, filtering out essential contradictory data simply because it does not fit the prevailing model. This over reliance on isolated disciplines guarantees structural blind spots. To navigate reality accurately, we must recognize that the universe does not respect the artificial boundaries we draw in university departments. The intellect must break free from the gravitational pull of its own specialized training. We must completely dismantle this systemic bottleneck if we are to engage with the world as it actually exists, rather than how our specific academic disciplines wish it to exist. This requires a brutal, honest assessment of our own cognitive limitations. To understand why single variable frameworks fail, we must examine the fundamental architecture of reality. Traditional academic boundaries are inherently unequipped to process the interconnected, feedback driven realities of complex worldly systems. We see a stark contrast between the academic silo and the real world. In the academic environment, disciplines like economics, psychology, and physics exist as parallel, non intersecting pillars. But reality is a nonlinear web of interactions. Market dynamics, behavioral biases, and energy flows do not operate in isolation. They constantly collide, compound, and disrupt one another. When siloed experts approach these systems, they inevitably miss critical cross-disciplinary interactions. Their specialized focus creates massive systemic blind spots. Consider the cascading failures in modern financial crises or public health emergencies. An economist might perfectly model the financial incentives of a policy while entirely missing the behavioral panic it induces a variable that a psychologist would spot immediately. The real world is a complex adaptive system that refuses to respect the artificial boundaries of university departments. It does not care if you have a doctorate in a single vertical. If you lack the horizontal connective tissue to see how psychological fear triggers economic contraction, which in turn alters political stability, your model will structurally fail. This is the danger of nonlinear environments. Small shifts in one node of the network can trigger geometric expansions of risk in another. The intellect must map the entire terrain, not just a single quadrant it was trained to observe. Relying on an isolated academic silo is an invitation to catastrophic miscalculation. We must discard the illusion of separated disciplines and embrace the messy, entangled reality of worldly systems. Charlie Munger's success over a 98-year lifespan was not the product of isolated genius, but rather the execution of a highly disciplined, multidisciplinary processing system. We are looking at the architecture of a rational decision making engine designed to aggressively filter out human stupidity. Rationality, in this context, is not an abstract virtue, it is an active computational filter. The engine begins with multidisciplinary frameworks gathering mental models, core disciplines, and foundational concepts. This raw data is then forced through a rigorous mechanism of rationality and inversion. Here, the system detects biases, actively seeks disconfirming evidence, utilizes checklists, and employs second order thinking. It operates via negativa, identifying what guarantees failure and ruthlessly engineering a way from those paths. Once the intellectual toxins are filtered out, the remaining data enters the stage of probabilistic reasoning. This involves Bayesian updating, precise scenario analysis, and a strict risk-reward calculus. Only after surviving this brutal gauntlet does a concept yield objective truth and optimized decision quality. The output is not merely a good guess. It generates high conviction choices, synergistic outcomes, and breakthrough insights. Most decision makers fail because they skip the filtering process, allowing emotional momentum and cognitive biases to corrupt their calculus. Munger engineered his mind to do the opposite. He recognized that human beings are structurally wired for irrationality, and the only defense is to build an external algorithmic protocol that forces the mind to pause, invert, and calculate. By treating decision making as an industrial process complete with safety checks and error detection, you eliminate the reliance on erratic biological intuition. This system transforms raw intelligence into predictable, repeatable worldly wisdom, mathematically optimizing the probability of success over a lifetime. The foundational requirement of this cognitive algorithm is massive, continuous, cross-disciplinary reading to compound knowledge over time. Munger was often described as a walking book, embodying the principle that no exceptionally smart person succeeds without reading all the time. But this is not about casual reading, it is about temporal leverage. When you systematically aggregate worldly wisdom across history, biology, thermodynamics, and psychology, the insights do not compound linearly, they compound geometrically. Imagine the brain as a capital base. Every fundamental model you absorb from a new discipline acts as a new asset, constantly interacting with existing assets to generate intellectual yield. Over a 98-year lifespan, this unrelenting curiosity creates an insurmountable cognitive advantage. Most individuals stop learning once their formal academic training ends, relying on a static database of knowledge. Their intellectual trajectory flatlines. In contrast, the algorithmic thinker constantly devours data outside their immediate profession. They study the laws of thermodynamics to understand energy conservation in business. They read evolutionary biology to comprehend market competition. They analyze history to anticipate human folly. This continuous input fuels the decision engine. Without a massive stream of high quality data, even the most perfect analytical framework will starve. The commitment to lifelong reading is the ultimate mechanism for compounding insight. It allows the mind to recognize recurring patterns across centuries and across completely unrelated fields. You are essentially downloading the greatest successes and catastrophic failures of human history directly into your cognitive software. This temporal leverage transforms a single human lifespan into an engine of continuous geometric intellectual growth, permanently separating the rational thinker from the stagnant crowd. Optimal cognitive inputs require bridging the gap between rigorous theoretical academia and pragmatic real-world consequence. To process information accurately, we must integrate the hard sciences, physics, biology, engineering, and history into a cohesive worldview. But raw data is insufficient without the correct philosophical orientation. Here, Munger adopted what can be understood as the scholar official ethos. In ancient traditions, the scholar official was not merely an academic isolated in a tower. They were intellectuals burdened with the heavy responsibility of statecraft and physical duty. We must apply this exact paradigm to modern decision making. The purely academic mind is detached from reality. It builds elegant, frictionless models that exist only in theory, devoid of the messy, unpredictable consequences of the physical world. The scholar official, however, unites rigorous theory with physical action. When an engineer studies physics, they do so to ensure the bridge does not collapse under the weight of rush hour traffic. The knowledge is tested in the unforgiving arena of reality. We must filter our information through this pragmatic lens. If a psychological theory sounds profound but fails to predict human behavior in a high stakes market, it must be discarded. The decision engine demands actionable truth, not theoretical elegance. You must step out of the theoretical vacuum and apply cross-disciplinary models to tangible high-risk scenarios. This synthesis forces the intellect to abandon purely speculative thinking. It binds your analytical models to the brutal feedback loops of reality. By adopting the scholar official ethos, you ensure that your aggregated knowledge is not just a collection of abstract facts, but a sharpened weapon ready to execute rational decisions in a complex, unforgiving world. True insight requires weaving approximately 100 fundamental models into an interconnected analytical grid. We are moving beyond the isolated disciplines to construct a latticework of mental models. This structural multiplicity is the only way to eradicate the single variable bottleneck. Imagine a vast cognitive grid where concepts like feedback loops from biology, the margin of safety from engineering, thermodynamics from physics, and probabilistic thinking from mathematics intersect. When a complex worldly problem arises, such as a market crash or a global supply chain failure, you do not analyze it through a single lens. You drop the problem into the center of this grid. The issue activates multiple nodes simultaneously. You assess the economic incentives, the psychological panic, the mathematical probabilities, and the structural limits of the system all at once. This synthetic understanding allows you to triangulate objective truth with devastating precision. Relying on a handful of models is insufficient. The human brain needs a critical mass of roughly 100 core concepts to adequately map the complexity of reality. Without this grid, you are blind to the secondary and tertiary consequences of an event. With the grid, the invisible architecture of the world becomes visible. You see how network effects compound, how ecosystems balance, and how first principles dictate outcomes. This is structural cognition. It is not about memorizing data. It is about building a dynamic, reactive neural net of frameworks that instantly cross-reference each other. By maintaining this multidisciplinary grid, you immunize your intellect against the devastating errors that destroy single discipline thinkers, allowing you to operate with unparalleled clarity as an elite complex problem solver. To ensure the analytical grid does not collapse under the weight of false assumptions, it must be strictly anchored in the unforgiving laws of mathematics, physics, biology, and engineering. This is the hierarchy of reliability. Not all knowledge is created equal. We must establish a foundational base, starting with the hard, immutable sciences. At the bedrock lies mathematics, probability, compound interest, and permutations. Above it, physics and engineering provide concepts like critical mass, thermodynamics, and the margin of safety. Next is biology, governing evolution and complex adaptive systems. Finally, at the top, we have the softer sciences, social sciences, psychology, and microeconomics, which deal with cognitive biases and human behavior. To prevent cognitive blind spots, we must strictly enforce the rule of reconcilement. This rule dictates that softer sciences must always reconcile with the hard sciences beneath them. You cannot adopt a psychological theory that violates the principles of evolutionary biology. You cannot propose an economic growth model that defies the laws of thermodynamics. The hard sciences provide a non-negotiable reality check against the wishful thinking often found in social sciences. When analyzing a system, trace its logic down the pyramid. If a financial model assumes infinite exponential growth, it violates the physical boundaries of reality and must be rejected immediately. By anchoring your cognitive architecture in the absolute truth of math and physics, you strip away subjective human delusion. You build your mental models on bedrock, not sand. This epistemic rigor is the ultimate defense mechanism, ensuring that your decision-making engine operates only on verifiable, unbreakable universal laws. When you operate with a multidisciplinary grid, you occasionally encounter environments where extreme, nonlinear outcomes occur. This happens when multiple mental models align and compound in the exact same causal direction, triggering what Munger termed the Lollapalooza phenomenon. In standard linear mechanics, One unit of input yields one unit of output. 1 plus 1 equals 2. But in a complex adaptive system, when distinct psychological and physical forces converge, 1 plus 1 does not equal 2, it equals 11. Consider a sudden market frenzy. You do not just have an economic shift. You have social proof humans looking at the crowd to validate their panic. You combine that with incentive caused bias brokers and media profiting from the chaos. Then it hits critical mass, a tipping point where the momentum becomes mathematically irreversible. Each force feeds the other, creating a massive, explosive feedback loop. The Lollapalooza effect explains both catastrophic systemic collapses and spectacular, unprecedented successes. If you only look at the world through an isolated discipline, a Lollapalooza event seems like a random, unpredictable anomaly. You will be completely blindsided by its magnitude. But if you have internalized the latticework of mental models, you can identify the convergence of these vectors before they detonate. You can actively position yourself to harness these synergistic forces for massive upside or engineer an escape route to avoid destruction. Understanding this nonlinear synergy is the hallmark of advanced rational thought. It shifts your perspective from basic arithmetic progression to the terrifying, awe inspiring reality of geometric compounding, allowing you to master the extreme volatility of worldly systems. We now arrive at a critical, counterintuitive truth. Knowing what you do not know is a vastly superior survival trait compared to raw, unchecked intelligence. Acknowledged ignorance is mathematically superior to blind brilliance. Let us examine the decision engine origin. Imagine two paths. On the top path, we have an individual with a high IQ, but unacknowledged ignorance. They are blinded by their own cognitive confidence and intellectually over leveraged. When this individual hits a volatile, complex environment, their unmapped blind spots trigger catastrophic systemic ruin. Their intelligence actually accelerates their destruction because it gives them the false courage to operate outside their competence. On the bottom path, we have an individual with an average IQ, but precisely mapped ignorance. They possess profound epistemic humility and deploy a strict margin of safety. Because they know exactly where their knowledge stops, they never bet the system on an unknown variable. This approach yields a high probability of long term survival. Identifying the exact parameters of your ignorance removes massive computational drag from your decision engine. By refusing to process noise outside your parameters, your mind operates with pristine efficiency. You allocate all your cognitive bandwidth only to the high probability variables you actually control. You eliminate existential risk because you simply refuse to play games where you do not understand the rules. In complex systems, survival is not about making the most brilliant moves. It is about consistently avoiding fatal errors. Acknowledged ignorance acts as an impenetrable shield against those fatal errors. It is a calculated defensive algorithm that preserves capital and reputation, proving that rigorous intellectual humility will permanently outcompound reckless intellectual arrogance. Survival relies entirely on boundary control, drawing a strict, unforgiving perimeter between what you truly know and the high risk unknown. We call this the circle of competence. Inside the circle lies your verified knowledge, anchored in the hard sciences and tested by real world execution. Outside the circle is an infinite ocean of high risk unknowns, speculative noise, and complex variables that you cannot reliably predict. The perimeter separating the two is the perimeter of humility. The foundational law here is that it is not about how large the circle is, it is entirely about how accurately you map where the perimeter lies. You can have a very small circle of competence and still achieve spectacular outcomes, provided you never cross that boundary. The moment you step outside the perimeter driven by greed, envy, or overconfidence, you surrender your mathematical advantage to chaos. You subject your decision engine to variance that you are not equipped to absorb. To maintain boundary control, you must continuously and ruthlessly interrogate your own assumptions. Am I relying on hard data or am I relying on hope? Do I understand the foundational physics and economics of this situation or am I blindly following the herd? Drawing this perimeter requires brutal intellectual honesty. You must be willing to look at a highly lucrative opportunity and say, I do not understand this, therefore I pass. This is the discipline of inaction. By perfectly mapping your known variables, you create a fortified sanctuary of rationality. Inside your circle, you are an apex predator. Outside of it, you are prey. Master the perimeter, and you master the system. Even within your circle of competence, perfection is mathematically impossible. Acknowledging our inevitable residual ignorance requires engineering a massive buffer to prevent catastrophic systemic failure. This is the margin of safety imperative. Borrowed directly from the hard discipline of engineering, it is the ultimate defense against unpredictable reality. Consider the construction of a suspension bridge. If the expected traffic load is 3,000 pounds, the architect does not build a bridge designed to hold exactly 3,000 pounds. They design an engineered load capacity of 10,000 pounds. That vast empty space between the expected load and the engineered capacity is the margin of safety. Why is it required? Because the architecture demands extreme redundancy to survive inevitable human miscalculation, environmental error, and unforeseen variance. A sudden storm, a structural flaw in the steel, or an unexpected convoy of heavy trucks will snap a perfectly optimized bridge. In intellectual and financial pursuits, we face the exact same destructive shocks. If your decision relies on all variables performing perfectly, your system is fragile and destined to blow up. You must demand a massive discount on your assumptions. If you calculate the risk of a project, you must build in a shock absorber so thick that even if your calculations are 50% wrong, you'll still survive. The margin of safety dissipates the kinetic energy of disaster. It absorbs the blow of bad luck and incorrect data. Without it, a single unexpected lightning strike can trigger a cascade failure. The rational mind never operates at maximum capacity. It always leaves a massive engineered buffer to guarantee survival. Once you have established your models, mapped your perimeter, and engineered your safety margin, you must execute. Rational execution requires severe isolation from the emotional momentum of the prevailing academic or market consensus. This is the practice of radical autonomy. Humans are biologically hardwired to seek safety in the herd. When a massive swarm of market consensus moves in one direction, the emotional gravity is intensely powerful. But the rational algorithm dictates that you are neither right nor wrong because the crowd disagrees with you. You are right because your data and reasoning are right. Look at the visual representation on the board. The red dots of the crowd move in a chaotic, wave-like emotional momentum. The rational operator, however, is the single blue node breaking away, plotting a strict linear vector based on objective truth. To achieve this, you must build an autonomic execution protocol. You must detach your cognitive engine from the neurological reward systems of social approval. When the crowd is euphoric, you must remain surgically cold. When the crowd is in absolute panic, you must operate with aggressive clarity. This detachment is not merely contrarianism for the sake of rebellion. It is an engineered isolation to protect the integrity of your probabilistic calculations. If you allow social proof to penetrate your decision engine, you immediately corrupt your multidisciplinary grid with the madness of crowds. The algorithm demands that you stand entirely alone, trusting the mathematics, the hard sciences, and your carefully mapped parameters. True mastery requires the psychological endurance to ignore the deafening noise of the herd and execute your blueprint with absolute, unwavering autonomy. We arrive at a synthesis of the entire system. Mastery is the constant, aggressive balancing of massive multidisciplinary data input with the ruthless boundary control of the competence circle. This is the ultimate cognitive dialectic. On one side, we have the drive for omniscience, the unrelenting intake of the multidisciplinary latticework, the continuous reading of the walking book, and the pragmatism of the scholar official. It is an outward explosion of curiosity. On the other side, we have ignorance, strict systemic filtering via epistemic humility, the margin of safety, and the unbreakable perimeter of the circle of competence. It is an inward contraction of extreme caution. If you only have curiosity without humility, you encounter ideological conflicts, the man with the hammer syndrome, and catastrophic risk. If you only have humility without curiosity, you stagnate. The algorithm demands both profound curiosity and profound humility. Neither can survive without the other. As we collide with the modern era of artificial intelligence, this dialectic becomes our most vital asset. AI provides us with infinite data, processing power, and the illusion of omniscience. But machine learning algorithms do not possess a biological margin of safety. They do not have skin in the game. To navigate the AI era, human operators must lean heavily into the structural cognition of Munger's Latticework. We must use the machines to accelerate our multidisciplinary inputs while applying our ruthless epistemic humility to filter out algorithmic hallucinations and systemic noise. The optimized state is a sustainable, compounding worldly wisdom that stands resilient against any technological shock. The engine is complete. Thank you. See you next time. Knowledge must never remain theoretical. Systemic integrity is only achieved when understanding is united with rational execution. We call this closing the loop. It is the absolute mandate of skin in the game. The cognitive algorithm demands a unity of action. Operators must eat their own cooking. Consider the ancient Roman arch principle. The architect who designed the arch was forced to stand directly beneath it when the scaffolding was removed. If the engineering was flawed, the architect paid the ultimate physical price. This closed feedback loop creates a ruthless filter against intellectual arrogance and sloppy calculation. Theory without consequence is merely cognitive scaffolding. In modern professional environments, we see a dangerous decoupling of decision making from risk bearing. Analysts, consultants, and forecasters often project models without bearing the financial or physical cost if those models fail. This asymmetry pollutes the decision engine with careless inputs. True rational execution requires aligning your physical survival with your intellectual output. When you know you must stand under the arch, your mind instinctively abandons theoretical vanity and searches for hidden structural weaknesses. You stress test your models. You aggressively seek out disconfirming evidence. You demand safety margins. Skin in the game forces the mind to transition from abstract speculation to hypervigilant survival mode. It burns away the psychological toxins of overconfidence and self deception. Systemic integrity is not guaranteed by high intelligence. It is guaranteed by the physical consequences of failure. To optimize your outcomes, you must structurally bind yourself to the results of your actions, ensuring that your rational understanding is flawlessly translated into concrete, risk aware execution.